So today we're doing something a little bit different for our sermon. I'm calling it Sermon Unplugged. Unlike other times where I've preached, I've got no slides, no pictures, no videos, and none of the little crutches I like to use when I'm giving a message. We're going to kick it old school. Way old school. Like first century old school. Back in the first century, right after Jesus' death and resurrection, the church used to come together in someone's house. And they would get together and they would share stories about Jesus. And of course, they would share these stories orally because there weren't any Gospels written yet. So they were just relating either their personal experience or a story that they had heard from someone else. And those gathered would listen and reflect on that word and think about what it meant for them and how they might be affected. And so I'm going to invite you to do that today. I am going to tell you a story. And as I tell you this story, I'm going to invite you to enter the world of the story. I want you to picture yourself as if you were there. I want you to hear the sounds. I want you to see the sights. I want you to smell the smells. And I want you to try to relate as a character in the story. Now, to set the scene for you, this particular story comes to us from the 14th chapter of Luke, starting in verse 16. And it is actually a parable that Jesus told when he was at a dinner party with some of the religious leaders of the day. And at this party, one of the guests said, "Isn't it great to be invited to the feast of God?" And so Jesus thought that he would share a word on just who is invited. Let's join the story. There once was a host who planned a great feast, and invitations had gone out to everybody who was anybody in the town. And then it came for the day of the party. Everything was ready, and so the host sent one of the servants out and said, "Go to those you have invited and tell them everything is ready. The party is about to begin." And so the servant goes out to every invited guest and says, "Come, it's time for the celebration." And one by one, everyone invited started giving their regrets. "Well, I know I said I would come, but I just got this new team of oxen and I haven't tried them out yet, so I really need to go give them a try. Please send my regrets." "Well, I know I said I would come, but I just bought a new piece of land and I haven't even seen it yet. I need to go do that today. Please send my regrets." "Well, I just got married. You can't expect me to leave the house. Please forgive me." And one by one, every guest declined. And so the servant had to go back to the master and say, "Master, no one is coming to the party. All of the guests have sent their regrets." And so the host said, "I want you to go out into the town, and I want you to invite the poor and the lame and the beggars and the cripples, and invite all of them to come in and enjoy my feast." And so the servant did. And every single person the servant invited accepted the invitation gladly, and they all rushed in, ready to enjoy the party. But there was still room in the hall. And so the host said, "Go outside of the town. Go to the roads and the lanes, and every person you see, invite them to come in. Because I'll tell you what, not one of those people I originally invited is going to enjoy a bite of my dinner." So did you put yourself in the story? Did you find your character to relate to? Whenever I've read this parable, I have always seen the parable from the perspective of the host. Don't ask me why, maybe it's because that's the first character. But if I think about how Jesus was using the great feast to mean the kingdom of God, then I have to recognize that the host of the great feast is God. And so I probably don't get to take on that role. And maybe you're related to the servant, another big character in the story. But again, if we think about God as the host, God's servant is probably Jesus. Thinking about how Jesus came and invited us into a relationship with God and shared that good news of the kingdom. The servant is probably Jesus' role. So I'm going to suggest we look elsewhere for our part in the story. Maybe you related to the ones outside the town. If I think back to how society worked in those days, the people outside the town probably fit in one of two categories. One was they were a foreigner. They weren't a resident of that town. They were just passing by. The other, though, could have been an outcast. Someone that society had shunned. Someone that they had said, "You are not welcome here. We're not going to let you live here." If I think of those two groups of people, I don't necessarily relate to either one. But some of you might. We have people in our congregation who have been told elsewhere, "You are not welcome. We don't accept you." We've had folks who've been told by churches that they are not accepted. They are not invited in. We have people who have experienced the pain of discrimination based on the color of their skin, where they came from, or who they love. Some of you may know that pain. But most of us, we can't relate. We've never had that experience. We've not walked in those shoes. So maybe you relate to the ones who were in the town but weren't invited to the feast. I like to think of those folks as the ones who got overlooked. The poor, the sick, the disabled, the people who were different. Maybe you can relate to that. Some of us have felt that way at one point or another in our life. Maybe we had an illness we weren't sure we were going to recover from. Or we had sustained injuries in some kind of accident. We didn't know how that was going to affect our life. And we may have even experienced moments of isolation while we dealt with that recovery on our own. Some of us have experienced those financial setbacks. The loss of a job, the company moving away, retirement, major changes in the way in our financial resources that lead to changes in our standard of living. And maybe in those changes we lost some friends, or we felt out of touch with folks. But for the majority of us in this room, we're pretty comfortably middle class. And even when those things hit, we can find our way out of them. We have access to good health care. We can get through the illness and the injury. We can adjust our standard of living to our new financial normal, or we may find that other job. Some way that we feel like we can pull ourselves out of that with the help of God. And so we may not relate to being the ones who are overlooked. Maybe we're not typically overlooked. When I did this exercise in a seminary class, I cheated a little bit. I imagined myself as a servant girl at the dinner. And I'm collecting up the dirty plates while I'm listening to Jesus tell this story. And I'm watching the host of the party. I'm watching to see if the host of the party has figured out that Jesus, he's talking about you. And I can just remember, that kind of, I won't say joy, but there's a certain good feeling that comes around with you watching someone else getting their comeuppance. And then reality came crashing back in. I am no servant girl. I am a white, middle-class, educated woman. I am not on the outside. I'm one of those on the inside. And maybe you saw yourself there as well. I'm one of those people who's too busy for God. Always finding something else that needs to be done. Maybe there is a deadline at work or a paper due at school. And you say to yourself, I want to spend time in prayer, but I'm so busy. I just don't have time. I have to focus on this instead. I have a little devotion that I do each morning. And I have a little bit of prayer time usually carved out. And I'm pretty good about doing that every morning, except for one. You can guess which one that is? Actually, there's probably two. But the one day that I often skip my devotion and my quiet time with God is Monday. I do a little Sunday. You want to know why? Would you like to know where I am on Mondays? I'm in that office right across the parking lot doing church work. I have to rush in so I can send those emails and make those phone calls and do those things. Really? Talk about missing the point. Maybe you can relate to what I'm going through. Sometimes we really want to be at church, but, we got that new boat. We got to take it out and try it out. We've got that new land, that new house, and we got to see how the construction is coming along. Or maybe we've got that relationship with that wonderful significant other who's not really big on church. And we decide, we're just going to stay here with them. Before I started having a position that really required me to be here at every service and every Sunday, I found excuses too. I like my bed. I am not a morning person. I could always find a reason to stay behind. But I always noticed when I did, I felt it. Something was missing that week. Something was off. I felt disconnected. And so I got to thinking, why is it that some of us readily accept God's invitation into relationship, God's invitation to the feast, and some of us, not so much. And I feel like it's directly related to our perception of how much we need God. Think about it. When you're feeling on the outside, that acceptance, that love that God offers, that unconditional love, wow, you really crave that. You value it and you cling to it. And when we're in those times of need, where we're not sure how we're going to get through, if we're going to recover, if we're going to get back on our feet, how much do we reach out to God, recognizing our dependence, knowing that we really can't and don't do it on our own. But when things are good, when life is comfortable, when everything feels like it's in control, that's often the time that we find something else to distract us. Or maybe we feel like we've got it all together. You know, I'm a pretty self-reliant person too. And we come to feel like, you know, we can do this. We can get ourselves where we need to be. Everything we have is from what we've done. We aren't dependent. That's just an illusion. I have had some people in my life who have helped me see past that illusion. It is the absolute best part of my job that I get to spend a lot of my time with our senior adults. And I spend as much time as I can with our folks who are in their 80s and 90s. These people have great stories. They have lived amazing lives. If you ever get a chance to talk to them, I highly recommend it. I mean, these are people who have gone through the history that we are reading in our history books. They have full lives, rich lives, wonderful experiences. And they have experienced tremendous loss. They have seen relationships end. They've lost loved ones, family, spouses, some even children. They have seen physical health wane. They have even seen some of that mental sharpness dull a little bit. They have had their financial situation changed through retirement, living on a fixed income. They've had to downsize maybe into smaller places and have lost maybe some mobility. And through every one of these experiences, for every loss, they've made tremendous gains. They have taught me that when we let go of certain things, we seem to gain more of God. They gain more of that feeling of dependence upon God that we really all should have. Their faith grows. They get the wisdom to know what is truly important. Love and relationships, and knowing that no matter what, God has got them in the palm of God's hand. You know, in birth, we come from God. In death, we go back to God. And in between, we have a choice. Do we want to live lives of self-reliance and isolation? Or Or do we want to accept God's invitation to relationship? Put our faith in God, realize our dependence on God, and know that no matter what, God will be there for us. It is my prayer for all of us that we will accept the invitation to the great feast, to the abundant life that God has planned for each and every one of us.